Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Be My Own Boss podcast. This week we are continuing on the conversation from last week, and as if you caught last week, if you didn't, I think everything will still play out. You can watch this and then go back, be like a Tarantino movie, just do it out of sequence. But last week we discussed the legislation that's happened here in Colorado and California, in Washington, in New York, and now Florida and New Jersey. And I was telling you guys for a long time that we're going to see lots of these states doing little things, even though everybody questioned when the federal thing went into when in March or whatever it was, they were like, okay, well, the next day, it was like March 11th. On March 12th, everybody was emailing and saying nothing happened. And I said, nothing would happen. You won't see anything on March 12th. But I feel like these things are going to happen more and more than they were because of that, because there's something to align with. And we were specifically discussing what's happened here in Colorado and the two new laws. Again, they're already laws. They were passed very quickly. Governor Polis already signed them into law. I talked about Stephanie Vigil and her work getting this kicked through. And I know that she got Polis's signature on it. And so, I mean, it's like the whole state's on board with this, but there are some hiccups in the language itself. And I think that Mike's today, he's going to walk us through some of the what he sees as tripwires, because as I mentioned last week, I think Mike reads legislation better than most people I know. Definitely better than me, because I have to go through it like 50 times and get a bunch of headaches before I really comprehend a lot of this stuff. So because it loops you back, and it's like, wait, if this, I have an if then type sequence in my head, like a computer. If this, then this, otherwise go back to the loop. And I feel like when I read legislation, I'm just in the loop for a long time before I can get out of that circle, before I'm like, okay, I got it now. And so, but I feel like Mike does it a different way. He was even telling me, well, I read it and then I take a break and I read it again. So maybe that's the way. Maybe the trick is to read it once and walk away from it and then come back. But Mike Harubi, thank you for being here. Mike, you guys, if you haven't checked it out, Be My Own Boss podcast. It's on YouTube and it's on audio podcast too. It's still yet to hit all the platforms, but you can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Red Circle. And I believe I found it on a couple others. I will put it in the show notes if I found which ones I found, like Breaker maybe. And it might have made its way to iHeartRadio last week. So, but you can always find it on Spotify until it's everywhere. So, Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to be here. Good to be talking economic freedom and being your own boss.
And I think, again, guys, this is what we're doing leading up to the elections, is doing these for 25 minutes a week. Because if you guys have questions, leave them in the comments below. If you want to hear about something specific, or if you want to have something discussed, leave it. I think what we're trying to do is make sure that you guys understand it's going to be very important what you do this year. And I was telling Mike, I want to do an episode on this, but it's going to be very important how you vote this year is going to be so important on all kinds of levels. It's not just going to be like, well, you mean for president, I'm going to vote for this. No. I'm talking about for everything. You got to really know what you're doing, or at least look into it. And if you're confused, I would stay on the side that, and this is what Mike said beforehand too, is that, at least stick with your job. Unless you're economically so well off that you don't need to, then vote with your heart or whatever. But if your job matters to you, you really better put the pieces together on who you're voting for, because that's like one of the biggest challenges I know that everybody's facing is financial.
Absolutely.
So Mike, what can you tell us about the two bills? Because as we know, all these bills have pitfalls. And again, I think we mentioned it last week. So before Mike goes, I will say this, that I felt like, anyway, this is my feeling, is that legislation I feel like it happened. There are times it needs to happen or whatever, but I always feel like if something starts and it doesn't have legislation and they try it for a lot of years, like they did with this gig economy, and then we start seeing it, it's basically, in my mind anyway, I feel like it's like, a report card that says doesn't play well with others on both sides. And, I'm sure that one side sometimes is better than the other or whatever, but I feel like this is why we elect people, is so that this kind of crap doesn't need to happen. They should be working with each other. And I
Yes.
want to blame one side or the other more heavily, but they really do seem to just get so nitpicky that even once there's a kind of agreement, I feel like they're like, well, now this is a sticking point, and that sticking point becomes we can't do that, and then it all gets thrown out. So what is your dissection of these, Mike, and what are the pitfalls, and right out of the gate, what are the potential pitfalls? What's your take on these?
Well, the state of Colorado has taken a big step to reducing the responsiveness of the transportation network, and the ride share for the transportation network companies, TNC and RNC. And the first thing, I took them in numerical order. 075 passed this year.
So 075, guys, is the rideshare one. They're split into two because this is what I was even told, is that if one fails, because a lot of states just put them into one. The reason they did two here is because if one fails, but the other one's working great, they don't want it to ruin the whole thing.
Right.
So
they're, yes, siloing it.
075 anyways, the rideshare one. This is Uber, Lyft. And
first thing it does is throws a giant wet blanket over the relationship between the drivers and the platforms. And what it does, the wetness of this heavy blanket, is that it installs what looks like a full-blown grievance process between the two parties. Now, a grievance process may be useful for true employees, particularly like in the utilities, perhaps, or in public service. But a grievance process is just not how the private sector solves it at all. So that's a giant step for the state to just rule out the kind of contractual discussions, the give and take, the time in privacy. So just imagine a giant blanket, soggy, weighing down everything in the relationship between the two parties. Normally, they should be equal. The second is that it creates a thing I'm calling a proto-union. And it pretty much forces, not completely, but pretty much forces.
Do you want to tell us what a proto-union is?
Yes, it's a driver's representative organization, basically. They're inserting something that shouldn't be between the two parties, the buyer and the seller. They're inserting a broker between them to broker grievances. This is a union's bread and butter, is having antagonism between the buyer of services, that's the employer, and the seller of services, that's the employee, in a straight employment relationship. And they have a long process of grievance, solving grievances. They can't just say, look, you came to work drunk. You can't do that anymore. If I'm going to fire anybody else, I'm telling you right now, like, okay, that's a conversation that you can have with an employee, but not in the grievance process. No, anything you give up, there are all this rationale as to how unions do it. And third thing is they protect the platforms and these drivers' representative organizations from any competition whatsoever. And the cost of the grievance system is the barrier. So what it's going to do is it's going to say, basically, you can't start up a driver's platform. Let's say you picked up, some niche that you want to specialize in, taking people to medical emergencies or, like an ambulance or something, but appointments, whatever you imagine. They're protected by law. They get a 3-year window. There's a look back as to the organizations that they set up. Can't be, you need a long experience before you can challenge them. And it's just cementing the union and the platform, giving them a form of protection, which I think has no validity.
I do have to ask, like, what happens to the people like even like me? So I'll put myself in the firing range here,
Sure.
so that I don't have to bring up anybody else. So if I'm doing rideshare and I'm using Uber and Lyft, but I also do private hire rideshare, but I'm not a platform. Am I contradicting that?
No.
Okay.
Are you?
Because I mean, no, because nobody I know who does that is trying to start a platform. Because like in Minneapolis or in Minnesota with the new law, Minneapolis and and St. Paul, you have to pay 110,000 in one and 120 in the other per year to have your platform. So you have to pay 230,000 just to get it rolling.
Right, just for customer one, ride
Yeah.
one. Yep,
But
those eventually either get tossed or the business goes away, and it becomes just a monopoly. Well, that's like a taxi. They're going to taxify everything.
that's why I was wondering, like, that doesn't fall over to the solo person,
Yeah, it's a
me, who might be okay.
taxi medallion. That's all it is. Except
Right,
that,
but like I don't need one of those when I'm doing private clients for myself.
right, you go around to a bunch of construction manufacturers or distributors and say, "Hey, I'll take your 5:30 p.m. rush delivery before the a.m." and
Oh, I'm at passengers though too. Like if I want to do ride share to the airport.
same thing.
Okay.
Same thing. This prevents you because you can't afford a grievance process. With like you need a fleet of clerks and all computers and software and all that expertise before you can handle anything and qualify as a platform. So the fourth thing, this is going to make, like with every utility, this makes the driver as an individual and the passenger as an individual completely non-involved in the grievance, in deciding the arrangements that are being made supposedly on their behalf. The drivers, their representation is being taken away from them and given to a proto union, which will be, staffed by experienced union members and supporters. And the customer, who the whole business revolves around, has no standing whatsoever. They're not involved in what it becomes a dispute under labor law, so they're just ignored. So they removed your freedom to talk to your employer. Talk to your customer, which is either the driver or the platform. You can't negotiate. And then the final thing that just slays me is that they make Arabic now an official U.S. language.
So yeah, what is the reason for that, or what is your biggest issue with that being in writing? Because I mean, obviously, we're the land of come on into the country, and I don't mean what's been happening lately, but just always, come from everywhere. It's okay. But what is your issue with it being in writing?
It is. I think it's usurpation of individual freedom. I don't have to have, like if I want to have a little business, I don't have to offer, make Arabic, or from that matter, Spanish. I speak a little bit of Spanish. I don't have to make them my official language and, offer communication and validification, all that, verification, handle
So
all
is
that.
that what this is doing?
Yes, you've got to put notices up in Arabic. You can read it.
But what about the 99% of drivers who know no Arabic at all?
Well, that's a good. Los Angeles County has something like 142 languages spoken in it, and they don't make them all. That's a preference. How come they're not choosing Vietnamese, or Portuguese?
Right. I guess that's my confusion. Like, why did this happen?
They put it in the law that way for the authors. See, the authors are diverging from the people they're trying to protect. The authors have they have a mission, and it comes out in the legislation. So, and you can't always say why. You can't always answer. You have to figure out. You can't figure out motive. in politics. You just can't. But you can figure out what their interests are. And Americans are very good at figuring out each other's interests.
Mm-hmm.
So you say, okay, what interest could they have in picking, making more languages required? Well, maybe they're trying to curry favor with a new group. Maybe they feel that Arabic is important, and so they're putting it in there. They don't say, they don't justify it. There's no rationale. There's no court requirement.
But I don't even get where would it come into play with me or another driver? Like, okay, I don't speak Arabic at all.
It's part of the cost burden. Part of the cost burden being imposed on new entrants, either to the platform or to the proto-union. That's what it's. It's a barrier to entry. It makes it more complex. You got to hire somebody or get an independent contractor who can put all your grievance material in Arabic.
Okay.
All right. So why are you doing that? I mean, this is what, Colorado?
Yeah. I mean, and again, Spanish wasn't in there.
No, Spanish was.
Spanish isn't there. But what about all the other languages of people that are here? Because for those that don't know, Denver is the #1 per capita sanctuary city now. So we've got people from everywhere.
Right.
So why are their languages? And again, I don't want them in, but why are they not even being considered?
Answering that question requires more government. Most of the authors are on record as being in favor of more government. So this is anything they can insert into a bill like this makes it more complicated. You need more grievances and more sessions and more committees and more, all of that. They love that. That's not the productive part of the economy. It's not feeding anyone, clothing them, housing them, etc.
So your opinion is that if they could have, all the languages would be in it? No? If some of these people could just straight up have their way, would they put all of them in there?
I don't think anyone but the authors and the authors' allies have any interest in having Arabic.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The authors even.
They have an interest.
Right. I mean, but does it just lie with Arabic, or would they like to see everything in there?
I don't know. We get our health here in Massachusetts. We get our health insurance information with an entire sheet full of other languages that we can go on the website and look at all the letter that they just sent us. Your insurance rate went up from $100 to $120 a month, that kind of thing. You can see that in, I think it's 20 different languages in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. That's make work. That's make work. What you say as a nation, you say, we're conducting this in English. We welcome you aboard. If you need help, if you need to find help, we'll help you find help to translate it. But we're doing this in English, so we all know what we're talking about.
Right, as it should be. I mean, that's the.
Right.
I mean, if you went to any other country, they're going to do it in their language.
Yeah. Anyway, then that leaves us with 1129, which builds on this grievance process.
1129 is the food delivery platforms, by the way.
It redefines the platform's business into instead of matching. You touched on this with your interviewee. Instead of matching rides or delivery stuff to be delivered and drivers willing to deliver it, it redefines the platform's business into managing delivery services. Well, I beg your pardon, they don't. My guess is they wouldn't do a very good job of it because they need all these employees and they have no control over them. Haven't got the faintest idea who many of them are. And that, as the sponsor said, it's deliberate. They want to get in there, and that's a little reveal. That it's a tell. What do they call it in poker? It's a tell.
Yeah.
So the and then now that it sets up the platform as managing, well, what is everybody else? Now you're an employee because that's what somebody else is doing the managing. So you just got to do it. And so it really significantly ignores and disrespects the individuals who are doing the work as individual business entities. That's what they want it to be. Now, the sponsors don't want them to be that because that's not where their interests lie. They don't want better, more sophisticated managers, they want people who are dependent. Okay, the third thing that this imputes by talking about managing and disrespecting the individual, this imputes employer status to platforms. It does it in law, but that doesn't mean it has to make sense. And of course, that's true of every law. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be law. The fourth thing, it starts to interfere with the contract between the drivers and the platforms by starting to assume that all the miles that these people drive are a reimbursable cost. And that flies in the face of the concept of business as costs and and rewards. You try something new, you acquire a cost, but it brings you a bigger market, so you make money at it. This is just going to it's going to put all the the miles, your positioning miles. It just says those we're going to keep track of, and they're essentially in between the lines. They're promising to come back in subsequent years and make all of that a cost to be added on. And what they're going to do is they'll make the platforms pay for it, and they will then reduce the amount of cash that they give people, and then they add that up, and you've lost all the drivers will have lost control of that part of the contract. They won't be able to do that. My favorite example is that guy that gets up at 3:30 and starts driving at 4 to bring people to in the morning, Portland Airport, knowing that there are people all over the south side of town and that want to go there, and he has his pick. Apparently doesn't have much competition. He picks them up and drives them to the airport and goes back for another one. Bless his heart. I've ridden with him a couple of times. So they're getting in there. A nasty little thing that didn't have to be. One of the provisions is that the transportation network company must rely on the word of the proto-union, not listen to the drivers. So that's another example of how they have removed the power of communication away from the drivers and put it in the designated hitter, which is a union operative. That's who's going to get these. That's the only person that qualifies when you look at the requirements.
No, that was even said directly in my podcast by the
right. It's just totally unnecessary if you're trying to make sure people get a fair break. Why do it this way? Well, there's an answer. Okay. The next thing is that they've set up, they've captured the drivers, the platforms, and they've forced them to give a large sample of driving instances, statistics, to the legislature for them to do research on, and so they can come up with more new bills that will take more power away from the individuals in coming years. They literally promise it, and so they've set up this arrangement to make sure it's statistically correct. They don't have any, but there's no forum for hearing from the drivers. There's no changing the subject by drivers. Can't point out anything out. They're not interested in that. They just want stats from the company. And of course, they'll acquire campaign finance contributions from the companies to make sure they go easy on them. So they're putting the money, they're giving more power to the platforms, and then they're getting ready to take their grift back from the platforms and get reelected, and they're just completely icing the driver. And it just drives me crazy how they do this. And they promise in public, that as well as I do, they're going to come back and do it again and again.
And Mike is quoting that from if you guys want to hear it, you guys can go back to the last audio episode of Rideshare Rodeo podcast from last week. That was a quote.
I don't know the individual in question. I know nothing about it. I read the words, I listen to them.
Well, I'm not putting my 2 cents even. I'm just saying that's a quote. They straight up said they'd come back every year and make it difficult.
So, oh, and then the trick with no one, which you won't get to the end of this and you won't read, is that the Department of Labor in Colorado gets to run all these laws by rules from here on. So they could just rule anything. Look at Washington, D.C. DOL can write any law it wants and just say, there's a regulation. And that's what Colorado has done. So it's fire and forget as far as the legislature goes.
Yeah.
They're going to get an antagonistic relationship over the drivers. The drivers are subjects, the customers are non-entities, and they're all going to go and have a pork fest.
So now most of these laws don't go in effect till January 1st. Some are in effect now, but I couldn't even get exactly which ones are in effect. It wasn't even clear to my interviewee last week, which I would think it should have been. Because I was kind of surprised, because I thought she would be able to say these are in effect now, these aren't, but I couldn't get any of that out. So I'm not even really sure what's in effect, what goes in effect in January. But obviously it's all law, so it's not sitting in some purgatory or anything either. It's done.
Yep, this is law. This is state law in Colorado.
Yeah. So I mean, watching it play out is going to be interesting, to say the least.
The House in Colorado is up for re-election.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, earlier you mentioned you gotta vote your career. Your career is on the line if this person doesn't come back, or people, other authors of this bill don't come back. That'll change the odds. Mm-hmm. And you read the news, you see that people are upset with the way things are going in a lot of different directions in this country. So every single level on the ballot that you're going to get is going to be important to protecting your freedom. Guaranteed. That you look what they're doing with what I call the blue state rollout. Steve was mentioning some of the states. You even got a couple in there that aren't blue. Florida.
Yeah, the Florida one was kind of, yeah.
Florida generally has a very good regime for regulating independent contractors. And some other time we can talk about Pennsylvania, but
maybe next week we can talk about, maybe we could blend in Pennsylvania and Florida because they're so different, and maybe tell people the importance of voting, because even the two types of legislation that we're talking about are completely night and day different. What Pennsylvania wants and what Florida did. What Florida did is not this type of thing, and it doesn't have a dollar amount. Neither does Colorado. That's another problem, is that every state's going to be operating under different rules and laws now.
That's the point of the rollout. They want to make it so excruciatingly difficult for the big companies that the big companies will knuckle under to get a temporary break, and they can go national with the really hostile legislation and get rid of independent contracting completely. For them, that's the payload. So they're actually doing much better with that than they did with the PRO Act. So they are as happy in private as they can be.
Yeah. So, and again, even before we wrap up here, even to the people in the red states who have always said, I'm in Texas, I'm not worrying about it. I'm going to tell you that maybe if you're a traditional independent contractor of some certain type, maybe it won't affect you, but in the gig space, it absolutely will. We've seen it before, because they're going to distribute it evenly, like the doxing they do. So you're going to get doxed on pay even in Texas, even if you don't have a change in regulation, because of all the other states that changed Uber regulation. Like, they're not going to let you earn 3 times as much as me and then have us communicating. That's too much of a problem.
Yeah, they with every union minimum wage bill, there always comes a maximum wage somewhere buried in it. Mm-hmm. Every single one of those union negotiations has a maximum wage, and the companies are happy about that. The ones that are, they got themselves a union. Okay, you got to live with it. So they put a ceiling on it.
Yeah.
So there go all the people like our buddy in Honolulu.
Yeah, I mean, most of us that are full-time are out there hustling. We're multi-apping. We know how to make our money. And I don't ever want to see that, well, the most you could make is this, even if it's an invisible number, but you know it. That takes the hustle away from it for me.
Then it's
Like,
just
why would I give up my Friday night? Why wouldn't I just work Thursday afternoon or Tuesday morning? You know, like, I mean, again, you're going to have not enough drivers on the primetime ones because people are going to be able to just go and, I don't know. I just foresee so many problems when these things start, but more and more states keep latching on, and I don't know I'm really not sure what the answer is. I'm not sure what it's going to be.
somewhere there's an office that's coordinating this. They've got a big conference table, a couple of small offices. They've got about 15 or 16 people, and they've got very, very skilled national lawyers to call upon. They have big conferences. They sit around about they have little lists and criteria and they phrases, and they have people word process them for them. You can just see it at work.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're into overtime here, and we're supposed to be 25 minutes. But we'll be back next week, and I don't know, maybe we'll talk about Pennsylvania a little bit because that one's new. So that one could be, I feel like we could talk about that one before anything gets real crazy over there, because I remember when Colorado's was new and whatnot. So maybe there's still some talking to be done before all the final decisions are signed in Pennsylvania. Maybe there's not, I don't know, but there's a lot of states looking at things that I don't like. So
it just this month was introduced as legislation, so we'll see what their plans are.
Yeah. But that's it for the week. If you guys have any topics, again, leading up to the elections, looking to help everybody we can. And it's not, again, I was telling Mike, it's not to push you in one direction or the other. It's to make sure that you're doing the best thing for you, which is kind of the lead of the podcast. Be your own boss, be my own boss. You know, like, you need to be your own boss. What is the best move for you? So to me, in this go round with the election, it's going to be all about economy and my earnings. That's the number one thing on my list.
It certainly is about mine.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally, if you can't meet my criteria, I can't vote for you with that. So, with that said, we'll see you back here next week. Be safe, keep earning before they try and stomp out how much you can earn. And,
thanks, everybody.
We'll see you back here next week.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Good week, everybody.